Well, joining me now is the Shadow Treasurer, Angus Taylor. Thanks so much for your time. Let's start with the issue during the week about the power supply. You were recently, of course, Energy Minister. Would you have done what the government did this week and allowed the Australian energy market operator to suspend the market?
Well, Andrew, the reality is that Labor has consistently opposed getting more supply into the market. We saw that with the Kurri Kurri gas generator. You're well across that issue for a long time. No, but the point here is this. Supply is the answer. It's not coming in and crushing the market. Get more supply into the market.
So if you were still Minister, I just want to get you on this point. It's pretty yes or no,
Well, I'm not
really.
still Minister.
Well, if you were still Minister and you're in Chris Bowen's situation, and I acknowledge you're not still Minister, would you have gone with this action?
I would have focused on getting more supply into the market. The first instinct...
So you wouldn't have had to? Is that what you're saying?
The first instinct of Chris Bowen was to have a gabfest with politicians and bureaucrats. My first instinct always is get more supply into the market. Now,
how would you have done that?
The facts here are really important. In the lead up to the election, we saw a gas price in Australia that was at 25% of the international price. We'd managed to contain gas prices in Australia, and that flows through to electricity prices, that flows through to supply
and
availability. We had worked hard over a long period of time not to demonise the gas producers, to make sure that there was the right system of carrots and sticks in place. Carrots in that we worked with them to get more supply into the market, like Narrabri, which again is a project you know well, Andrew, and sticks through the ADGSM. And they understood the arrangement. They understood that that was how it should work. It did work. Now, the wrong instinct here is to say, forget about dispatchable supply, reliable supply. Let's crush the market. But if you don't understand dispatchability, the importance of reliable supply of gas and electricity, then you will never understand the need to focus on that, because in the evening when the sun goes down, you've still got to have your dispatchability, Andrew. And that's why projects like Kurri Kurri, the Tallawarra generator down in the Illawarra, a technology-neutral capacity mechanism, all projects that we've driven over recent years that I've personally championed with lots of opposition. Labor opposed them, resisted them at various times. They're still not favouring a technology-neutral...
Let me get back to this point. So they shouldn't have crashed the market. Is that what you're saying?
Well, at the end of the day, they're in government. But what I am saying is if you focus on supply, if you focus on reliable supply, you don't get yourself in this position. Labor has consistently resisted...
Let's talk about supply. Let's talk about
reliable supply.
How are we in a situation, your government was in for 9 years, that we are reliant on such decaying coal-fired power stations?
So we've been replacing them. The best example... Well, the best example of this is Kurri Kurri. The debate over
Which isn't built yet.
Well, but we committed to it with opposition from Labor. Let's be clear about this. With opposition from Labor. They opposed it again and again and again. And under pressure from people like Joel Fitzgibbon, largely because of the local politics, they rolled over in the end. But they didn't want it. And we've seen this, if you take the capacity mechanism, which is an incredibly important reform. Now Bowen is saying we're going to allow the exclusion of coal and gas. I mean, this is ridiculous, Andrew. You've got to focus on supply. You've got to consistently focus on supply. Labor's always opposed it, and now they're looking around to point the finger at someone else.
All right, you could have set up a gas reservation in government. Why didn't you?
We had an ADGSM, and it worked. And we saw when we put the... And you remember this, back in 2016, 2017, we saw a spike in gas prices. We put the Australian Domestic Gas Security Mechanism in place. We worked with the gas producers. I worked personally with the gas producers, with both carrots and sticks. The carrot was... We work with you to get more supply into the marketplace, and we have the ADGSM there available as needed to make sure you do the right thing. And it worked. We saw a significant reduction in gas prices as a result of that. That flowed through to electricity prices. We saw an 8% reduction in household electricity prices, 10% in small business, 12% in industry. Andrew, this worked. Now, Labor want to have a renewables target of 80%. They haven't explained how they're going to firm it up. They're saying they're going to build a lot of transmission lines, but these are going to be like extension cords without a power point.
Okay. You wanted to extend Liddell coal-fired power station. and Morrison went with curry instead. That's pretty fair.
That's not.
You did want the government to put in some money with the New South Wales government to extend the life of the Liddell coal-fired power station. Is that correct?
Let me correct you on that. I always said there's one of two options you must pick. You either must have replacement or life extension. It was very clear with Liddell, it was getting old and the better option was replacement. And that's why we went with a Kurri Kurri gas generator, as well as the Tallawarra Energy Australia generator. So two major gas generators necessary to replace Liddell.
So you take...
And this is... The point here is Labor opposed this. It was extraordinary.
Okay, all right. Do you take no responsibility whatsoever for what's happening with the energy crisis?
There is no doubt...
You're in government for 9 years.
There is no doubt that there has been upward pressure globally on energy prices around the world. There's no question about that. And that's a big challenge. It's a big challenge. We saw that challenge earlier in this year. There's no doubt about that. The point I'm making is that there's sensible actions that can be taken to alleviate those pressures. And, you know, it's exactly the same with interest rates and inflation.
Do you take any responsibility for the energy crisis that we have now? There's not enough supply.
What I am saying is that we had managed this in the lead up to the election successfully. We had managed it successfully, Andrew, and we showed how you do that, which is to focus on supply. Don't demonise traditional sources of fuel. Don't demonise the coal and gas-fired generators, and we delivered the outcomes. Now, Labor has promised a $275 price reduction. We'll see if they can deliver the outcomes. Our outcomes were very, very clear. The question for them is, are they still committed to that? I haven't heard a single Labor politician since the election commit to that.
All right,
reality is mugging them.
We'll talk to Tony Burke on that.
This is difficult.
But look, in 2018, you set up this thing called Underwriting New Generation Investments, UNGI. Did you fund a single project from that?
We have funded the Kurri Kurri gas generator. We've funded Snowy 2. We've been working with Energy Australia, I just mentioned, Tallawarra, which is happening.
That's 4 years ago. We're working. Built anything out?
They are all of those projects are proceeding. All of those projects are proceeding.
Pretty slow burn, though.
Well, you can't do these overnight, and this is the point. This is why when Labor opposed the Kurri Kurri gas generator, they were making a very significant move because that's an impact further down the track. It does take years to put these things into place. That's why getting a capacity mechanism in place that's technology neutral, that doesn't pick your favourite fuel sources, is so important, Andrew, and it's absolutely critical. Absolutely critical that Labor support those sensible policies that we've been pursuing, that they've been resisting consistently. And you've seen the debates. You saw how they played out. There was enormous opposition within Labor to these projects. Right. And there continues to be because they demonise traditional fuel sources.
Let's talk about the target, 43%. You'll block it in the Senate, yes?
That's not our policy, That's quite right. So
you'll be voting with the Greens to block it?
We are not supporting the 43%.
Couldn't we reach that target anyway? Potentially, you always said we meet and beat our climate targets.
It's always about how. It's always about how. You've got to explain. We've always been very clear. We don't commit to a target unless we know how we're going to do it and how we're going to do it without raising the cost of energy.
How much?
Now, Labor hasn't explained how they're going to get to 80% renewables by 2030 with enough dispatchability to avoid what we're seeing right now. They haven't explained that, Andrew, and for us that's critical.
How much do you think we will reach by 2030 in terms of 2005 levels?
Well,
you'd set 26 to 28%. You said we were beating that target. Could we end up at 43 anyway?
The projections are well over 30% now.
So you think it'll be 35 maybe?
We'll wait and see how the projections play out in the coming years. But, the projections recognise policy for what it is. They don't pretend that there's something that's going to come and do this magically without any impact on energy prices or jobs.
Onto your portfolio now, sorry. Should Philip Lowe still have a job? I mean, shouldn't he have raised interest rates earlier?
I'm not getting into criticising the Reserve Bank. What I am going to say, though, is this. We have global inflationary pressures, interest rate pressures, which are very significant right now. In the last week in the capital markets, we've seen there's a view that interest rates in this country now are going to go up very substantially. The question is, what's the government going to do to alleviate that? If you want to manage interest rates, if you want to manage inflation, you've got to manage your budget. It's very, very simple.
But the debt and deficit is your old government. That's what's sitting there.
Well, we had a pandemic and we turned around a budget at the last budget, we turned around our economic situation, our fiscal policy, by $100 billion, Andrew. So that's an enormous turnaround. Labor now is in a position where there are these very strong global inflationary pressures. It's for them to build on that extraordinary turnaround in the budget of $100 billion and make sure that they're doing everything in their power, in their economic management policies, to put downward pressure on inflation and interest rates.
What would you cut?
Well, we've been very clear through the election campaign. $45 billion of off-budget spending, which Standard & Poor's themselves have said is a danger for interest rates in this country. $20 billion of that is the extension cords without a power point.
So all their promises you'd cut. What about what else in the budget would you cut?
Well, I've been very clear about the $45 billion. We're not in government, but the $45 billion of off-budget spending, we were very clear about.
So they should just dump their
campaign.
promise?
Well, Standard & Poor's have been, unambiguous in their view that this is unnecessary spending that's putting upward pressure on interest rates and inflation. Now, we're going to be in a position in the coming months where the government will be competing with households to borrow money. They're in direct competition, driving up the interest rate. So the key for Labor is to manage their budget, as we did at the last budget, $100 billion turnaround, manage their budget so we don't end up in that position where the government's forcing up interest rates for Australians on a mortgage. We've got very high levels of household debt, lots of mortgages out there. It's critical the government take pressure off Australia.
Just about out of time. Sorry, just a couple of quick ones. Are we going to see a recession next year?
Look, I'm not going to make a forecast on this. Jim Chalmers has promised us there's not going to be one. I hope he's right. I genuinely hope he's right.
That's true. Now, the other one is equity, the home equity scheme. New South Wales government, that's a federal Labor policy. New South Wales government's done something similar today or announced they're going to in the budget on Tuesday. What's your reaction to that?
Well, we've been very clear about that during the election campaign. That's not our policy. If you want to help people into a home, put downward pressure on interest rates, manage your budget, manage your money. That's the task for Labor and state government.
Will you keep the super policy, being able to access your super for you?
Well, that's the policy we took going into the election. We've made no decision otherwise. I mean, obviously, we think it's an incredibly positive policy for Australians, being able to choose how they use their savings. And we've been unambiguous about that, and we continue to be.
Angus Taylor, thanks so much for your time.
Good on you, Andrew.